Hey fearsome friends, I've gone again with an unorthodox theme. That being revenge stories. They were a lot of fun, and very much worth a listen. From nasty landlords to entitled customers, these petty revenge stories will give you a warm feeling inside. So one of the managers at my local gun store is loud, a hard-ass, ex-Marine, who has a short temper. He's exactly the kind of guy you're thinking of. Conservative, brash, forward, conspiratorial, and in your face. The kind of guy who, if you ask the question, "How was your morning?" he'd respond, "Well, there's new construction on my street which made it hard to get to work, probably because the Democrats want to make it impossible for me to sell guns." Yeah, that guy. He's loud, political, and annoying, but he is never boring. So the manager was at the gun store, and a customer called up in a rage. She was furious because she'd ordered a gun online, and there was some problem between the gun being shipped from the manufacturer to the store. He tried to get the necessary information from her to contact the manufacturer, but in her rage she refused to give it to him. Finally, after half an hour of going back and forth, she relented and gave him the information he needed. He got a hold of the manufacturer and the gun was shipped in. As you can imagine, when she came to pick up the gun, she wasn't any nicer. In return, the manager wasn't nice back, and the gun store employees generally aren't nice in the first place. In America, when you want to buy a gun from a store, you have to fill out a long government form called a 4473, with lots of questions to answer and dates to mark and signatures to make, etc. Usually when you fill one out, store employees will usually guide you through each question to make sure everything is filled in appropriately. But instead, the manager watched her fill out the form, saying along the way, "That's wrong, you missed that, you didn't do that right," just to make her even more mad. So after pissing her off even more, she finally finished the form. When it came time to pay, she walked up to the front counter, but instead of her paying, her husband took out his credit card, and that is a problem. You see, in filling out that 4473, you put yourself as the owner of that gun. However, if her husband was paying, then it could be construed that he would be the actual owner of the gun, which would be illegal, since he wasn't the one that filled the form out. Sometimes gun store employees won't care about this, if it's the same party, and they were married after all. But the manager decided to be a dick about it. He told her that her husband couldn't pay, because that would be a straw purchase. She threw a fit, but after getting nothing out of the manager, she relented and pulled out her own credit card. But just as she was about to make the purchase, the manager asked the couple, if he was going to buy it, why wasn't he the one filling out the form and taking ownership of the gun? "Oh, I'm a felon," the husband said. Yeah, that's right. The husband who tried to pay for the gun had been convicted of a felony in the past. And as you may have guessed, felons cannot buy guns. The manager lit up and said that because it's pretty obvious that the husband, a convicted felon, was going to be the recipient of the gun, and that this was a straw purchase, the manager went ahead and cancelled the sale. The husband then said, "Oh, it was just a minor thing. I was only in for 3 years." The manager said it didn't matter. A felony is a felony, and he could not buy the gun. The wife went ballistic, but there was nothing she could do. So they ended up leaving the store empty-handed, and the gun had to be sent back to the manufacturer. Don't be a dick if you don't have to. This all started in November 2019. My daughter works at a huge chicken place, where they say "my pleasure" a lot, and she was front of house one Saturday. So I stopped by to grab some food for the family. As I was waiting for my order, there was a line going out the door. So a register opened up to help shorten it, and a lady, that I'll refer to as OL, was at the front of the line and would not move. A cashier called to her, but she just stood there, so the guy behind her, assuming she hadn't seen or heard the cashier, pointed to the open space for her to move to. The cashier smiled and waved, and OL made a face and made an extremely racist comment, and very loudly. You could have heard a pin drop. Everyone stopped and stared. My daughter stood there shocked for a moment, then remembered she was in charge. So she walked around and stood in front of OL and calmly explained that this was a privately owned restaurant and there were lots of children present. My daughter didn't yell, but she didn't blink either when she stared OL in the eye. You need to leave. None of my team will be serving you today. Customers actually cleared a path to the door as OL doubled down and started screaming horrible names at my daughter, who didn't even flinch. That would have been all the staring contests with her brothers that had prepared her for this moment. When my daughter refused to yell back, OL spit in her face. Now I was about to unleash Mama Bear when the owner came out and showed OL a printout from the camera system of her face and a list, and then said, "Mum, I own 12 restaurants here in town. Here is a full list, and this copy of the photo that all my employees will have burned into their memories. Consider yourself banned from any establishment I own. Also, if my employee chooses, I will call the police." My daughter declined, and the lady left. Fast forward to 2020, and lockdown, when there was takeout and delivery only. OL has been trying to get service at several of the restaurants on the list, but she has been denied several times. A couple of times new staff had served her by accident, and she thought that if she drove up, surely they would serve her now. Well, now they have personal information and decline orders made by her online, on apps, and even if she drives up. My daughter gave the cashier the pleasure of walking up to OL's car in the curbside and handing her money back, even adding, "Have a nice day, ma'am." I think that was the best petty revenge ever. A moral? Be nice to people who can feed you. They have long memories. In September 2017, I had to look for a new place, as my previous lease was up. I wanted to find a rental near my workplace, even though my company gives full flexibility for working remotely. It's also a good exercise to walk to and from work, on top of hitting the gym a couple of days a week. So the new place I set my eyes on was a duplex room on the ground floor, with an individual bathroom and kitchen, with a separate entrance. The landlords, John and Jane, are a more elderly couple in their 60s, who lived upstairs, and their conditions to me were the following. Rent to be paid in cash only, no checks and no direct deposit, etc. would be accepted. This, of course, was a little underhanded way for landlords to not declare rental income, and my salary at the time was well above the level where I would receive any tax returns, so I didn't mind this. No overnight guests. This is a term I didn't mind at first, but it peeved me in the later months, as I will explain in a bit. No smoking, no pets. No loud noises past 10 p.m. John allegedly is a very light sleeper, and any tiny bits of noise at night may wake him up and affect his sleep. Now, I'm not confrontational and strive to be as good of a tenant as I can, but here are some incidents that are somewhat unrelated to the final fallout, for people to get a feel of the type of tenant I am and the type of landlords they are. But the frustration I felt definitely did build up in me, deciding to get revenge. I gladly help out the landlord with their tech devices without charge. iPad out of storage, phone or computer running slow. As long as they come downstairs to ask for help, I'll gladly provide my assistance. I have had scoldings from the landlord for my alarm being too loud, from me not snoozing it fast enough, and me closing the door behind me too hard when leaving for work, to name a few. Now, summer months get quite hot, So not to leave a juicy rotten mess in the compost bin, I refrained from buying things like watermelon and only ate fruits that would leave behind peels only. And the night before garbage collection, there would be minimal cleanup for the couple. Also relating to summer, I can't tolerate heat at all and tend to sweat a lot when it gets too warm. So during the summer months, my room temperature would get up to above 30 degrees Celsius, 86 Fahrenheit, without any AC. So I asked the landlords if they could turn it up, but they responded that John couldn't stand the AC blowing cold air, and that was that. Only when it became ridiculously hot did the AC finally come on, and in the beginning I tried to take a shower at night to cool off. But guess who got a stern talking to again, because of the noise from the shower running? The landlords are extremely strict concerning the overnight guest policy. Whenever they hear me on the phone with my dad, they would come downstairs to check if there was someone else there. In 2018, I met my now wife online, and she lives in Montreal, while I'm in Toronto, and due to the guest policy, I would be travelling to see her most of the time. My best friend got married that summer and invited both me and my wife to his wedding, with me being his best man. I pleaded with the landlords to allow my wife to stay with me overnight, just for one single night, and was told, "If we knew you would ever ask to have someone stay over, even a single night, we would have never rented to you." So we spent the weekend at an Airbnb. So with all the side stories out of the way, I'll tell you about the main incident. Eventually I decided to stop renting the place, with November being the final month. I would go back to my parents, living 300 kilometers away from Toronto, for a couple of months and then head over to Montreal. It just so happened that November ended on a Friday, and the Saturday was December the 1st. I notified the landlords by the end of October of my decision, and told them to use my security deposit as my final month's rent, as we'd agreed upon it in the beginning. But upon receiving a text message, John came downstairs and asked me the details, in which I explained to him that I would be moving out, but due to the situation that my parents are 3 hours drive away, I would like to clear out everything before noon on December the 1st. He agreed at that time, but I was stupid not to get anything written down. Throughout the month, I gradually moved my stuff to my best friend's garage, so I would only have the large furniture, a bed frame and a mattress, to be taken care of on the morning of the move. The landlord would also have people over to check out the room over the month, so I would make myself scarce at those times. It was never my intention to leave on a bad note, but everything came crashing down on November the 28th, and I still have the text messages, so it's easy for me to recollect the timeline of the events. A text message I received from Jane that night is as follows. "Hello. I want to confirm when you'll be moving out. Me. December 1st as we agreed. Jane. Someone is moving in on December 1st, so it would be best if you could move out on November 30th. Me. I can't do that. As I'd explained earlier, my parents wouldn't be able to come on November 30th, due to them having to work on that day. Also, you have already given consent to me moving out on the Saturday. Jane. No, you said you'd move out at the end of November. Me. That day we'd already discussed that I'd be moving out Saturday. My parents and I both have work during the day and they can't make it Friday evening. Jane. You can move out Friday night. Me. That's not possible, and we'd already agreed on December 1st before. Jane. Your rental agreement ends on November 30th, so you must move out Friday night. I don't care how late. I left the conversation at that, as there was no point looping back if they were deliberately ignoring what I was saying. I also sensed the things to come, so I moved out most of my things and spent the rest of the week with my friend. Technically I could move everything then and stay with my friend until Saturday, but why give the unaccommodating buttholes the last laugh? I left only the bed, an IKEA computer desk, and basically nothing valuable if the landlords decided to vandalize my stuff. As an extra FU, I left my alarm clock set to 9 a.m. at max volume. The reason for me not staying at the place to stand my ground was because the landlord lived just upstairs, and all that was between us was a door locking from their side, and they had keys to my room. The best I would get away with would be a heated confrontation the night of them trying to force and kick me out. And who is to say, worst case scenario, there was a 100% chance I will still be alive the following morning. The conversation resumed Friday night. Jane, when are you giving back the room keys? Me. For the last time, I'm not moving out tonight. Jane, you packed up all your things? Me. There are still pieces of furniture inside that I will pick up tomorrow morning. Jane, someone is moving in tomorrow morning. You better move all your things to the side tonight and get rid of them early tomorrow morning. Me. Sorry, I'm not around tonight. I will be back tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. for my stuff. Jane. You must get rid of all your stuff before 9 a.m. Someone is moving in. Me. Must? Why must I? Did we ever sign a written agreement on this matter? When I drop by tomorrow, if I find anything missing or damaged, or anything in the dorm belonging to someone else, I will call the police. My parents picked me up the following morning at 10 a.m, and we arrived at the place around 10:30. We found out that the landlord had changed the locks, which is highly illegal, so we decided to call the non-emergency line. We were on hold for an hour and a half while everything else unfolded. And half an hour later, the landlords came out claiming to leave for work, and the following exchanges occurred. Jane, get off my property, you're trespassing. Me, you changed the lock, I can't get my stuff. Jane, of course I changed the lock, you no longer live here. Get off my property before I call the cops. Me, I already called them because you're trying to take possession of my things illegally. Jane, good, I'll have them arrest you for trespassing. They went back inside and 10 minutes later opened the side door to my room. John said, get your stuff and scram. My dad and I went inside where we disassembled the bed frame and the computer desk, and I noticed my alarm clock stuffed in a garbage bag on the floor. John helped us clear the room by tossing whatever we disassembled out of the house like trash. But also, where was this so-called person moving in at 9? Give us the key back now, you got all your stuff, John said. Not before you give me a signed written statement regarding my lease here, including the start and end of my rental period, the monthly fee paid as rent, as well as confirmation of any damages from inspection. I had pictures of the room back when I was checking out the place, so they can't do me on damages that were already there. I will give no such statement, John said. Now give me back my keys. At this point, he and I both know this can and will be used as evidence for rental claims for tax. I refused, and he went back upstairs. By the time we had everything out in the front yard, I finally got hold with the police department, and they said they dispatch officers on site to settle the dispute. I was finally catching a break. The two landlords came out again to leave for work, when my mum stepped in front of their car, blocking them from going anywhere. Insults were exchanged, and Jane dragged my mum and threw her onto the lawn to clear her from their car. Unlike certain scum, my family had no experience to immediately take out our phones and start recording when things got physical. Fine, I will stay here and wait for the cops to come for you. Let my husband leave. It's 12:15 and he has to get to work. He is already late. My house is here. It's not like I can run anywhere, Jane said. We agreed and watched John drive off, whilst Jane went back inside, and not 5 minutes later, I saw Jane come back outside again and tried to make a run for it. I immediately chased after her and blocked her from getting away, and as I was doing that, John drove back holding a phone in his hand, yelling, "Assault! You're assaulting my wife and I have you on camera." Before putting it away to come help Jane, I'm stretching my arms around her blocking her while she's punching at my arm trying to get away. By then, a neighbour from across the street who was walking his dog saw the commotion and came to check out what was going on. Another next-door neighbour who had come back from shopping also came over, and they calmed everyone down. But now that the landlords see they can't just get away, they started to throw this sob story of how me, as a nightmare tenant, wouldn't move out and assaulted poor old her. After they'd told their story, I showed the neighbour our text messages from the nights prior and told them I just wanted a written statement about my lease and nothing else. "You didn't even pay today's rent yet," John said. And me, after a baffled look, said, "Huh? Here is $50 cash. Change back the locks now. That room is still mine for today. Nobody else is moving in." It's okay. You don't have to pay anything," the neighbour said to John as he was about to grab the money. "Come on, I think it's better for you not to take the money. He just wants you to sign something about his lease, and that's perfectly reasonable." John finally gave in, and after me drafting the statement and the two neighbours reading over to check everything on it was as discussed, John begrudgingly signed it. I also got the contact details of the two neighbours as witnesses, in case something else came up. Now everything is settled, the landlords drove off, and the neighbours went back to tend their own businesses. My parents and I went back to loading my stuff into the car, when another lady approached us. "Hi, are you the previous tenant moving out?" "Yes. And you're the new tenant moving in?" I replied. "Oh no, I'm just here to check out the place. The landlord told me the previous tenant still hadn't moved out yet, so she wanted me to come by in the afternoon." It was now around 1 p.m. I briefed her about what had just unfolded, after which she said, "Wow, thanks for letting me know. Yeah, I'll look elsewhere, thanks." I thought that was the end of that, but whilst grocery shopping with my parents at around 3:30, I got a phone call from a private number. "Hello? Hi, this is the Toronto Police Force. I was told there was an incident around noon at this address. Is that correct?" "Yes. The issue has been resolved and we no longer need an officer dispatched." Me naively thinking this was regarding my call to the non-emergency number. "I don't follow," the officer said. "I have here in front of me an elderly couple claiming you have assaulted them." Yes, the two of them went to the police station after finishing up with us. The lady had clear bruises on her arm and on her chest. Her husband also has a video of you engaging in a physical confrontation with her. The temperature on that day was a little above freezing. Not very cold, but warranted a jacket. Jane was wearing a fairly warm and fluffy jacket, so it would be unlikely to leave a mark, even if struck physically. This mark was also visible 3 hours after the confrontation. "Can you confirm that you had physical contact with the lady, and is it you in the video?" "Yes," I said, "but hear me out. I was blocking her while she was trying to run away. There may be bodily contact during the confrontation, but in no way did I hit her or do anything that would result in bruises." "So you confirm that you had an unwarranted physical contact with Jane. Also, for your information, any unwarranted physical contact is an assault, no matter the reason." The couple decided not to press charges this time, but be warned, if they find you on or near their property, you will be arrested. So after all this, where is the revenge? Of course it would be including my rental expenses in my taxes, but hear me out. Here is what I had done on top. From December 2018 to March 2020, I have searched all rental advertising sites weekly, looking for ad posts from John and Jane. You see, every time I found an ad placed by them, I would take a screen capture of it with the time and date, and I compiled them all and reported a lead to the CRA, Canada Revenue Agency, on suspected tax evasion. I used the screenshots as suspected evidence of the room being rented out, by which the landlord would be receiving rental income. I have also included my experience of the landlord's unwillingness to provide written statements during my rental and strictly ask for cash payment, as well as suspicion that this activity had long occurred before my stay at the location. Unfortunately, I do not have any ways to follow up on my revenge, as the CRA would not disclose the results of its investigations. Still, I have confidence in finding evidence of regular cash inflow on the landlord's account once a target has been painted on their head. I hope these scumbag landlords will get audited and fined for their scummy ways. This happened a long time ago, when I was 17 or 18, and that's when the petty revenge took place. But I was 15 to 16 when the offence occurred. When I was 13 to 14 years old, I became really good friends with a girl that we'll call Bev. We got really close. She had a sister with Down syndrome, was a really sweet girl, and I liked her a lot too. We had sleepovers and hung out a lot all the time. She really was one of my closest friends for 2 to 3 years. There was even a time in high school that I saw some kids picking on her sister, and I took them to task, tearing them a new ass for picking on this nice sweet person, telling them what lousy excuses of human garbage they were to choose her as their target to bully. I never even told Bev I'd done this, because I knew she'd just be upset that her sister had been the target of worthless high school bullies. But one day in our history class, a debate occurred over a highly political subject, and I participated quite vocally and vociferously in the debate. It happened to be an issue I was quite passionate about, so I didn't hold back. I can't remember if it was the same day or the next, but this friend of mine, Bev, who I had so much love for, told me she could no longer be my friend because she was embarrassed to be seen with me after debating in class like I did. I was really hurt, but I said okay. Obviously I couldn't go back in time and change my behaviour, and nor would I. In my opinion, a true friend wouldn't and shouldn't hold that against me, but rather just say that's who she is. It's not who I am, but I still love her. So then after that year, I went to vocational high school for my final 2 years. I still went back to my original school for dances, and my high school diploma would be from them. But my actual school day was spent attending the vocational school, so I didn't see Bev for a couple of years. If she had seen me at school events, as I was welcome to attend anything affiliated with my home school, I didn't notice it. I then got myself a pretty serious boyfriend between my junior and senior year in high school, and he had the same career passion as me at the time. We even discussed marriage, although it didn't end up happening, but we were a very serious couple. One day he and I went to the mall that had recently been built in our city, and as we were walking through a very popular department store and about to head out to the actual mall area, someone called out my name. I looked over, and what do you know, it was Bev. I'll admit I was confused when I realized it was her. I had pretty much written her off after she was too embarrassed to be my friend, and I didn't really understand why she looked so happy to see me, or excited to be talking to me. We spoke very briefly, and I wasn't rude to her, probably because I didn't want to look like a jerk in front of my boyfriend, and it turns out she was employed there. I kind of fake smiled at her and nodded my head, and may have given her a brief line about how life was going, but I didn't want to stick around very long, as I'd never forgotten the way she wronged me in 10th grade. Right as my boyfriend and I were about to walk away from her, she quickly jotted her phone number down on a piece of paper, handing it to me, and said we should catch up soon. I took the piece of paper from her and exited the store. Now, whether or not she saw what I did next, I'll never know, because I didn't turn around to see if she was watching us walk away. But there was, very conveniently, a trash can just outside of the store, so I threw her number out, and I wasn't discreet about it in case she was watching. I then said to my boyfriend, she thought it was embarrassing to be my friend, so we'll just keep on not being friends. I felt like I'd taken all of my power back in that moment. I was always a terrific friend to the people close to me, and she'd ended it for such a petty reason. I'm not forgiving when I feel I've been wronged or rejected for who I am, which was someone who will debate a topic I believe strongly in, given half the chance. So I got my petty revenge by tossing out her number when she wanted to revisit the friendship a couple of years later. I wanted to toss her offer of a renewed friendship out, just like she tossed away our friendship previously. It's one of those life moments I look back on with a smile, even 20 plus years later. So all this took place back in the 5th grade, and I was the type of kid who preferred books to people. So I would literally sneak into the library and hide during recess so I could read. I was reading Lord of the Rings for the first time, which was easily the most difficult novel I had read up to that point, because it was such a massive book. I hated carrying it back and forth to school, because my backpack already weighed a ton from my textbooks. Also, I was 9 and pretty lazy. Fortunately though, I owned the same copy of the book they had at the school, so I would just remember which page I'd left on, and this eliminated the need to carry it back and forth. I would often get in trouble for reading under my desk during class, and I had upwards of 40 books confiscated throughout the school year. It drove my teacher nuts. Then one day I was reading The Lord of the Rings under my desk, as was my routine, and as per usual, the teacher took it away. But then I remembered that I had forgotten my master plan that morning and had accidentally brought my copy from home, and it was currently in my backpack hanging on the back of my chair. So as quietly as I could, I pulled it out and continued reading. However, inevitably 10 minutes later, the teacher came over and took away my book. Upon seeing the cover, he did a double take, walked back to his desk without a word, and held the 2 copies side by side, with the most befuddled look I had ever seen on an adult's face before. Being 9 and a menace, I burst out laughing. The teacher looked back at me and also started laughing, and it took him a full 5 minutes to compose himself. He and I were dying of laughter, while the rest of the class looked on none the wiser. Over a decade later, I was working as a hostess in a restaurant, and the teacher came in. He recognized my face immediately, but couldn't remember my name. He only knew me as the bookworm girl. Apparently, he tells that story every time he gets the opportunity. I was reading the other day about how some people quit their jobs on the spot and the company went under. This was when I was part of a mass walk-off. It all happened in the late 90s, when I worked for a concrete company. We were the ones pouring foundations, footings, floors, etc., and it was long hours, but the pay was good. Most of the guys on the crews were awesome people, with a great work ethic, but we also had some that were slower, but not too slow to impede the job. Well, Boss Man was a micromanager, interfering and loud. I don't think I ever heard him when he wasn't yelling, and didn't think anything about grabbing a worker to yell in his face. One week before the walkout, we were working on a foundation for a kiln at a sawmill. There wasn't enough people in all the crews to do the job, so he hired some locals to work until the job was finished and paid the same as us. We didn't care. More hands, more work done. And them getting paid the same as us, we considered they were lucky. So no hard feelings were had, and everyone seemed to get along with all the new guys. Now one of the new guys wasn't shown how to do a certain task and thought, who better to show me than the boss man? So he walked over and asked to be shown. And that's when all hell broke loose. I'm not sure if Boss Man was already in a bad mood, or if it was this that caused it, but within a second of asking, Bossman had the guy by the throat against the wall and slapped him so hard he fell over the safety fence and down a 4-foot fall to the concrete floor. Bossman just walked off the job site and drove away. This was a time when cell phones weren't very common, and none of us had one, but the two-way radio in the truck had an emergency channel. So the foreman radioed for an ambulance and police, and the foreman went in the ambulance with the worker and filled out his profile report at the hospital. Lucky for the worker, he ended up with just bruising and nothing broken. Since the foreman was the second in charge, he had all of our home numbers and gave each of us a personal call to let us know the hospital report and to ask us to get together for a group chat. We all showed up except one, the guy who got hurt. We passed it off as he was too sore and thought no more of it. Not only because the chat was at a pub and the first round was free, we all wanted to find out what everyone's thoughts were. Other than the new guys, we were all happy enough to just walk away like Bossman did and let him suffer the consequences. They just wanted the money, and this is when our except one limped in. He told us he'd just come from home after talking to the officer in charge of the case, and said Bossman was just arrested for assault causing bodily harm, or something like that. I can't remember right off the bat, but that settled it with the locals. They were all charging him with breach of contract, since he'd hired them to complete this job, and now they can't. The next day we were all at the job site, and when Bossman showed up, we each walked up to him and said directly into his face, "I quit," then went to our vehicles and drove away in parade fashion. He ended up with massive fines through his company for breach of contract at the sawmill, and that took up everything he saved. He had to sell off equipment to make ends meet. Then came the 6 or so temp employees with their claims. The court sided with all of them, and he was made to pay out each contract in full. It broke him, and he had to let the bank take almost everything. I don't know why, but his wife stuck with him, even though she admits he got his just desserts. She comes from a family of money, so even if he is broke, she isn't. Also the guy he threw over the fence. Yeah, he won his case too, and Bossman had to spend close to 5 months in county jail, had a huge fine he couldn't pay, 1 year of anger management courses, and had to volunteer at the local food bank. If there was more, I can't think of it right now. But in the end, his in-laws loaned him the money to start up again, and for the last 10 years has been doing good for himself. He was actually a great man to work for, and I like to think that his entire workforce walking out one by one had something to do with it. This is a classic from years ago. My parents had 3 kids, all pretty close together in age. So at one point, they had 3 kids all under the age of 5, which was a handful. They also had a neighbour that loved to blast loud music all day and into the evening, past the kids' bedtime. One day Dad decided to ask the neighbour if they could turn down the music because he had kids trying to sleep. And the neighbour's response? "What are you, some kind of asshole? F off." Dad, being the non-confrontational yet passive-aggressive type, went home. So what did Dad do? Every time the kids woke up in the middle of the night, Dad's first move was to go to the phone, call the neighbour's house phone, and as soon as neighbours picked up, Dad would hang up the phone. As you can imagine, 3 kids under 5 woke up a lot in the middle of the night. So this continued for at least a couple of years. Also, this was the 90s, so call blocking and caller ID wasn't a thing. My brother and I, along with his friends, got revenge on our terrible neighbours last summer. We're all between the ages of 19 to 26, if you're wondering. They'd be blasting music all night, drunkenly screaming at each other, and their cheap hug hybrid sparked 24/7. We'd called the cops, but they'd said it was not against the law until 11:30 p.m, which is when we can file a noise complaint. But when we'd called to file one, we were told that, unless it's a life or death situation, nobody will respond until 8 a.m. or so, because the station closes at 5:30. So the cops would respond after everyone passed out, and find no evidence to support our complaints. Now all our other neighbours are known Karens who have hated us since we moved in almost 20 years ago, and have found every reason to complain since. For example, the time my brother was sat by our fire pit with his girlfriend, and the neighbour kids hid in our bushes to spy on them. The Karens called my mum about how her son is traumatising their babies, and one even holds a grudge against us because of it. But my then 15-year-old brother wouldn't get romantic with her then 11-year-old daughter, so when the cops would question them, they'd deny anything was going on. We felt we couldn't do anything in retaliation, or at least my parents did. When they went on a day trip, my brother and I, both adults, with I being the good, responsible one, invited his friends over and told them to bring their wireless speakers. He informed them of our plans, and they showed up not even a half hour later, with speakers as well as pot, booze, and things to cook over a fire. They wanted a party, and we'd have one. Our parents would be gone until late into the night, and they wouldn't have cared anyway, since we were never usually loud or anything. They connected the speakers to my brother's TV, his room is right next to where the drunks party, and hid them around our property, I making sure they were all within our boundary line before securing them in place. Then I opened every window and prepared to test our setup. At first we played it at a low volume and found that all speakers were functional and the sound carried well. Then they asked, "What music and sounds are you using?" My brother smiled and told them how our parents are always complaining about me liking Celtic music, too much flute and bagpipes, and they all smiled and cheered like kids on Christmas. I went inside, cranked the volume up as high as I could, without damaging the speakers, and selected the loudest music I liked. It was super loud standing next to it, but outside, it was loud enough to be an issue, but not enough for public annoyance, and we knew the cops wouldn't respond anyway. Our poor neighbours were nursing hangovers that may as well have been contagious. Of course, though, it didn't bother us too much, since we were out the back. Our music played into the evening until the speakers needed to charge. Once they were all collected, the music level dropped quite a bit, so I returned inside and cranked the volume more, as well as playing the music on my TV as well. Of course, our parents would have killed us if they knew, so I also kept in contact with them, making sure I knew when they were coming home. Around 10 that night, they called us and said, 15-minute warning. So I went inside, turned everything down and off, and went back out to resume our little get-together. Sure enough, 15 minutes on the nose, my parents returned home, and our neighbours came out complaining about how loud we'd been. They looked at us and asked what they were on about, specifically asking me, since I was always such a goody-goody. I shrugged and said, "Well, we had all the windows open, so I was playing my music a little louder than normal, since you went home." I'd counted on my parents being exhausted, and knowing that usually my brother and I could throw parties so silent that you'd have never known, and it paid off. My parents told them to shove it and reminded them that noise complaints didn't count until 11:30. But they never have it going that long. They finally stopped, but this summer has yet to start, so we'll see. Our cousins have professional-grade amps and speakers for their drums and guitars, so I have an idea ready just in case. I work in the tire department of a major retail chain, but I sometimes bounce around the store, The other day I had just come back to my department, after covering a lunch break in a separate department, and upon returning, my co-worker had a small line at the register. I immediately started helping her bag items as she rang out customers, and as I was bagging, I looked up to see an older couple. The woman was fussing about us taking too long, so I asked her, "How can I help you, ma'am?" "I need these tyres," she says, handing me a piece of paper. "Okay, let me check the computer to see if we have them in store." I walked over to the computer and looked up the size. We didn't have any in store, as it was a smaller tyre that usually isn't requested, so not unusual. "Sorry, ma'am, we don't have these in stock," I told her. "What do you mean you don't have these in stock?" she asked. "Well, it's an odd size, so we don't keep them stocked up as much," I explained. "Well, where else can we go?" At this point, my co-worker stepped in, and I just watched. It's important to note that the lady had been really rude the entire time, and the man with her, probably the husband, looked completely fed up with her. My co-worker was giving the man directions to a different tyre shop in town, and the man asked, "Does the next town over have them?" My co-worker's face lit up, and she volunteered to call them up to see. Usually we just give them the store's number. She wanted to call for them instead. The woman was growing increasingly ill over the idea of driving to another town, due to the time it would take. After a failed call to the first store, the man asked about a different neighbouring store. He was also getting a smile on his face, as you could tell he was enjoying the idea of us taking up more of his wife's time. My co-worker called that store as well, and also volunteered to call the other tyre store in town, and a third neighbouring town. After calling around for about 5 minutes, no one was answering their phones. The woman was getting really upset, but the man's face was lit up. He was even kind of laughing, and she eventually blurted out, "I just shouldn't have woken up this morning." My co-worker replied, "No, don't say that. What you mean is, I shouldn't have gone anywhere today." "No," she said. "I shouldn't have woken up. I'm ready to go home to my lord," she replied, raising her hand up in the air. Now my co-worker, slightly more pissed at the woman, just stopped talking with her altogether and focused on the husband. She continued to call around for about another 15 minutes, until someone finally answered. It started in December 2019 and finished a few weeks ago. So for context, I was selling an item of clothing in a Facebook group. I wanted something either bigger or to sell it, and this guy, D, messaged me and asked for a trade. That was all fine, and we both sent off our items. Fast forward a few weeks and I go to message him to say that I hadn't received it, but he'd blocked me. I got my girlfriend to message him, and he instantly unblocked me and was cocky, saying that he'd return my item if it was that big of a deal. Alright, fine. So I waited and waited, and COVID came, then it was August. He'd blocked me again, so again my girlfriend messaged him, and then he blocked her too. I told my mum about it. I know. So he apologised and said he'd pay me at the end of the month. Again, okay. The end of the month came and I got a message that read, "If you message any of my family, I'll get you done for harassment, and I'll get a non-molestation order against you." Now, if you didn't know what a non-molestation order is, it's a type of injunction that may be sought by a victim of domestic abuse against their abuser. I'd never met this guy, so what? Anyway, the message ended with him saying he was going to take me to court. I called so many lawyers on this, but they wouldn't take it, so I sent him a letter saying he's got to pay or I'll take him to a small claims court. He sent my item back, and after 9 months said, "It was stuck at the post office. I opened it and it was disgusting. It was covered in animal hair and had sweat stains galore over it." I messaged him saying it was disgusting and he could have it back if he paid for it, but he replied, "Guess I'll see you in court." So I went through with small claims. He sent his defense in, saying it was a gift and blah blah blah. He also said I'd sent him abuse through messages. I was pissed at this point. I'd paid for our court hearing to be sent in originally, so I was definitely going through with it. I sent in every piece of evidence I had, every chat log and every picture. March came around and a few weeks beforehand, I was looking through the court documents. I even called the Royal Mail to ask them questions about post offices and times and shipping. I literally spent all day every day focusing on this case, and when the day finally arrived, I answered the phone. The judge was lovely, but had tried calling Dee twice, with no answer. After some back and forth, she was pissed, then said, "Given that I've called Dee twice and he didn't answer, and he hasn't submitted any evidence, I rule in your favour." So I got £95 and my item back. I received the court letter yesterday, and yup, it's ruled in my favour, and he has 21 days to pay, or it'll be taken further. I win. And all this over £45. I'm petty and I'm proud. I used to sell cars, and the dealership I worked at had a policy of being honest, honouring our word, and not advertising bull, which was both a blessing and a curse. And because our competitors didn't abide by the same rules, after looking at our reviews compared to our competitors, you'd see that. So I was dealing with a customer, working on a deal on a truck at the time, and it had a conquest rebate of $1,500. We were at roughly $40,000, and the customer I was working with qualified for that conquest rebate. However, before I closed him, he was browsing on his phone and saw a competing dealer offering a very similar F-150 for $35,000. Now, our offer to him was basically invoice minus rebates. Now, I knew this dealership was lying on several fronts, and I explained that to the customer, on how the dealer got to the $35,000 price. It was as follows. They didn't include freight or prep in any of their advertising, and they had small print saying this. They stacked rebates that weren't stackable. They included every single conditional rebate possible, which would render you unqualified for them. They had mandatory add-ons such as VIN etching, nitrogen in tyres, and tinting that they didn't tell you about until you got there. Also, they charged a lot for those options, and I also knew the GM at this dealership never did invoice deals ever. I tried to explain this to my customer, but of course he didn't believe me, because I'm a car salesman, and no one should trust a salesman. I then explained to him that it was close to closing, and I knew what the inventory on this vehicle looked like, and it was really unlikely the conquest rebate of $1,500 would be available tomorrow. He said he was going to go to them and get a better deal, since we'd refused to beat their offer. I told him the price we'd offered was off the table the second we closed up shop for the night, and tomorrow the deal would be completely different. So the next afternoon he came back in absolutely fuming and asked me, "Can you believe they wanted to charge me freight and prep?" "Yes, I can." "Can you believe they included rebates that I didn't qualify for?" "Yes, I can." "Can you believe they included rebates that can't be combined?" "Yes, I can." "Can you believe they wanted to charge me thousands and thousands of dollars for add-ons?" "Yes, I can." I asked him what price they'd finally come to, and he said $42,500. I asked him if he'd bought the truck, and of course he said, "No way in hell was I going to pay $2,500 for the same damn truck that I could get from you." I smiled and said, "So you want the truck?" "Yes, let's just get this over with," he replied. "Well, unfortunately the conquest rebate didn't get renewed, so your new price is $41,500. He stared blankly at me and said, "Are you effing kidding?" "Nope," I said. "Here, I can show you." So I showed him the list of rebates from the month prior, and the expiration date on those rebates, which was yesterday, and then I showed him the new list of rebates, which clearly showed no conquest rebate. He looked at me and said, "Look, if you don't honour the price you gave me yesterday, I'm just going to go back to the other place." Every dealer has access to the exact same rebates. They also don't have the conquest rebate anymore. So if yesterday their price was 42.5, today their price is going to be 44,000. He huffed and puffed, but eventually gave in. I'm a first-year college student, and the building I live in has a group chat with almost everyone who lives there. It's pretty common for people to hop on the chat and ask to borrow things. So naturally yesterday, when I needed a sponge, I went to the chat to see if anyone had one. This was at about 6:30 p.m, and before I went to bed at 10 p.m, no one had responded. At about midnight, I was woken up by someone knocking on my door. A few seconds later they knocked again, followed by them banging on the door really loudly, probably also waking up people in nearby rooms. I heard them laughing and running away, and I wasn't about to get out of bed to see what they wanted, but I did get up and get some water, then was up for about an hour. Now I get very anxious when I try to go to sleep most nights, due to some minor incidents that have happened in the past. So I was pissed that I now had to try to calm myself down enough to fall back to sleep. The next morning I woke up to see a few messages that I'd received around 11:45 p.m. And one was in the group chat where this guy, S, said that he had a sponge and gave me his room number. He, as well as this other guy R, also messaged me separately, saying they had a sponge if I needed it as well. Now their messages were 3 minutes apart at 12:13 a.m. So either just before or just after the knocking, R messaged me again, saying he still had the sponge and to let him know when I needed it. Seemed innocent enough. I went to take out the trash around 10 a.m, and in front of my door was a soaking wet sponge with a pen sticking out of it. My roommate hung a pen on the door back in September, so we could write stuff on the door. So I think they were trying to hang the sponge on the door. Now I'm even more pissed, because the sponge was gross, and they'd woken me up just for this. I thought about going to the RA, but they'd probably just get written up and nothing would come of it. Plus they'd know I'd ratted them out, and that just wasn't fun. Now my building is a hotel for COVID reasons, so they had extra space, and we have hotel landlines that we can use to call other rooms. I knew their room numbers, so my roommate and I decided that we were going to call their room throughout the night, at 5 to 10 minute intervals, so it keeps bugging them. We haven't actually done it yet though, so I'll update when we do if I can. But I'm super excited, because I think it's the perfect revenge. Back in 1985, I was a helicopter-based federal wildland firefighter in Southern California. I think most of North America burned that year, and it was very wild times. Now, like many other jobs, there is a not officially sanctioned but established tradition of the beer assessment, where when you foul up, you get beer assessed, anywhere from a 6-pack to 2 cases. Beer was due for your next working shift, and was shared amongst the crew after work. It actually supported a useful bonding experience, where the donor underwent considerable good-natured ribbing. Now by and large, wildland firefighters drink beer socially. That is the norm. I, however, hated beer with a pure feral hate. It was a point of social contention with workmates, constantly peer pressuring me to join in, which I steadfastly refused. If I felt like drinking, I provided myself with wine coolers. Yes, I have a huge sweet tooth. And their response to my "I hate the taste of beer" was inevitably, "You'll learn to like it." To which my response always was, why should I learn to like something I hate? This occurred with coffee too, which I also despise. Side note. Eventually I discovered that I had an allergy to hops, so that is why folks enjoyed beer way more than I did. Now, despite my antisocial beer aversion, I was popular in my crew and work was good, if crazy busy. My favourite description of the life of your typical wildland firefighter is that it is a cross between being in an adult summer camp and being on a chain gang. And for me, I got the added bonus of helicopter rides, and I rarely messed up. It was late in the season, and things had calmed down, and we were back in the station. It was my Friday and I was packed up to leave to see my fiancé, who was a state park naturalist and lived 135 miles away. It was routine every week. Now enter my crewmate, let's call him Moose, because he was about the size of one and was extremely stubborn. Also, he was almost as smart as the said critter too. Now Moose got a lot of beer assessments. As a matter of fact, he undoubtedly led the crew in such. "Hey Moose, I'm out of here, see you Tuesday," I said. "You leaving, OP?" he replied. "Yeah." Moose pointing to a metal file on the workbench. "You left a tool out. You left a tool out, beer assessment. You owe a 6-pack. He didn't jump up and down and wee himself, but I think it was a near thing, as Moose rarely caught somebody else out. Sure as the devil, I had been hand sharpening our hand tools that day. I was the acknowledged best one on the crew, and the others prized my tools. Also, I didn't mind doing it, as I found it relaxing work, but I had forgotten to put the file up. Sourly I said, "Are you serious? You're beer assessing me?" With a happily bobbing head, he answered that he was. Then he crowingly returned to our office to announce his great achievement. I, half amused, half grumpy, put the file away. I was half grumpy because this was going to ruin my virgin beer assessment record, and I headed off to see my fiancé. On the drive there, I'd made a plan that gives me a serious case of the giggles. Upon my arrival, I dragged my virtually non-drinking fiancé out to Trader Joe's, which was the biggest liquor deli store in the area, and she gleefully assisted me in finding a special beer for my 6-pack assessment. Now, what each of us knew was that our beer wouldn't fill a thimble, but I did know that foreign beers were generally held in high esteem. So I found one where all the writing on the cans was in German. I want to say it was called Issenbeck or Erstenbach, but I really can't remember after this many years. But the cardboard package it came in, I immediately threw away, which had plenty of English writing on it, including the glorious phrase, non-alcoholic lager. Yes, I found a German near beer. It wasn't cheap either, but so what? It was only a 6-pack and worth the value of laughter. I laughed at that 6-pack every time I looked at it for the next 2 days. So Tuesday morning came around and I rolled into work carrying my beer assessment. The first to see me was our pilot, let's call him BB, which is short for Bigfoot Biker. He was about as large and hairy as Bigfoot, and proudly rode a beautiful Harley. Also, he was a very good guy, who later came to a sad end. "Morning, OP," BB growled. His growling didn't mean anything. That was his normal voice. He was squinting at the beer. "What's that?" "Morning, BB. Beer assessment. Left a tool out Saturday," I said, feigning surliness while manfully trying not to giggle. BB looked at me appalled and asked, "Who assessed you? You don't drink." "Moose, and I messed up, so I got assessed," I said. As I stepped over to him, BB was grumbling that Moose was an idiot and that it was unfair. I didn't respond, put my stuff away and placed the beer in the fridge. Now, by work regs and tradition, that beer could not be touched until after 5 p.m, when the heli base had shut down. Then it was fair game. Now, our head boss was on vacation for a few more days. We'll call him Red. And Red was a retired recon Marine sergeant, and he'd enforced rules intelligently and efficiently, and was actually the best boss I had ever had before or since. So as he was gone, things were a bit slack and people lazed about because his number 2 was very lazy. I swear that fridge got opened by crew members who looked longingly at that beer 40 times that day. As you can imagine, beer assessment beer was generally the cheapest findable, because we were not paid generously, and here was some amazing beer for them to enjoy as soon as the day ended. Their German beer lust was so great. I swear that time slowed down and it took an hour and a half to go from 4:45 to 4:57 that day. At the end of the day, I left as they stampeded the fridge. The next morning I rolled in, and again BB was the first to see me. "Morning, BB." "Morning, OP." "You know, that was the weakest beer that I have ever had." "Really?" I said, pretending to be surprised. "Sorry, but you know I know zip about beer as I don't drink it. Guess I just made a poor decision." BB nodded at me sagely and I went in. I put up my gear and looked in the fridge. 4 had gone and 2 were left. They had each had one, and the universal opinion was that it tasted okay. I think they didn't want to hurt my feelings. But man, that was a really light beer. Well, Red came back to work the next day, and he was very tickled to find 2 German beers in the fridge from the beer assessment, and he checked on them multiple times, waiting for 5 p.m. to roll around. When it did, I was gone, and he made a beeline for the fridge. The results were reported to me by BB, that Red opened the fridge, grabbed a can, popped the pull tab and took a huge guzzle, then froze and spat it all out over the eating table. Red then in a loud outrage said, "That's near beer. Who the hell bought near beer?" "OP did," BB said. Red froze for a bare moment, then dropped his head and laughed. I should have known. And then, who was stupid enough to assess OP? BB told me about it the next morning, and it became a crew project to get the crewman that was off, who we shall refer to as the world's cheapest man, because he was to steal the last can and take it home by talking up how awesome it was. There was no other fallout, and yes, the world's cheapest man did steal that last can, to everyone's amusement. They were a good bunch, and I have many memories of that fire season. So one day I was out running an errand. I was just wanting to deposit some cash, when this absolute piss baby decided to act like he was 5. I was going to a drive-through ATM, and to get there I was driving through part of a parking lot, and it was literally the only way to get to the ATM. And it was literally the only way to get there. Now, as I was entering from one part of the lot, I saw some other dude driving to the same place. I came out into the entrance before him, and we had a decent amount of space between us, so it wasn't as if I just cut him off while entering the line. But what does this guy do? Honk like a maniac. Not once, not twice, but just aggressively hit that horn like his life depended on it. There was a small line at the ATM itself, including me and 3 cars in front of the piss baby. I could see the guy in my rearview mirror, and he looked really irate. He then promptly, and quite aggressively, pulled out and floored it out of the ATM line, and that was that. Right? Nope. Dude got back into the line, looking annoyed as hell. He then proceeded to look like he was popping off at me, and even started sneering and making faces. I'm a 20-year-old woman, and this guy looked like he was in his 40s. Now, I get running errands can be stressful, and I thought that maybe this guy was having a bad day. But seriously, just grumble and be annoyed, but don't act like a petulant child. Accept some reaction from me, because I will not put up with it. The 2 cars in front of me finished up pretty quickly, but I had other plans. I was in no particular rush, and I had to deposit 20 bills, and like most ATM machines, you can just stick a wad of bills in and it reads them. but I decided to feed the machine each bill individually. And this of course caused a prompt on the screen to either add more bills or finish the deposit each time, which added a good minute or two of me being there. It didn't take horrendously long, so I didn't delay him that badly. But I know that every second counts to someone who clearly can't be bothered to wait. The most glorious moment was when I made eye contact with him through my mirror, and he was sitting there very clearly steaming and beyond annoyed at having to wait. I just flashed him the biggest crap-eating grin. He probably couldn't see it. It was enough for me that he was pissed. Years ago, when I was 22, I worked at a warehouse in a shipping-receiving capacity, loading and unloading trucks, moving product from the assembly line to the docking bay, etc. The shift I worked had several dozen people in it, and 6 of them were stoners, 5 customers and 1 dealer. This was in the days before weed was legal in my country, and everyone knew they were stoners, but their smoking didn't affect their work performance, and senior management were completely fine about it. As long as they weren't smoking blunts when HR came by for meetings, they could do as they pleased. Now most of them were pretty chilled people, as you might expect from potheads, but one of them was an absolute choosing beggar. We'll call him Arnold, because he looked like Arnold from Magic School Bus, except his hair was a different colour, and obviously he was a lot older. The dealer of the group we'll call Winston, and I'll come back to him later. Arnold was always mooching off Winston's customers, and Winston himself. He always claimed he was good for it, and he was related to one of our regular loyal customers, so he just got away with it. He never paid for his own weed, but was always trying to get the good stuff instead of whatever cheap crap these guys had on hand. I'm not posting this in Choosing Beggars though, because I just hung out with these potheads and wasn't a pothead myself, so he never mooched off of me. That said though, he was a whiny, spoiled brat who always tried to get his own way, and if he didn't, he'd pout, whine and bitch like a 5-year-old until someone eventually got in his face and yelled at him to shut up. Then he'd switch to silently sulking. For example, one time we were working later than usual, and we had to stagger our breaks because we needed production to keep running, but we also needed people to take breaks so they didn't have the grounds to sue. It was decided that one production line would go for a break while the other one kept running. Then the second would shut down after the first had come back to take their breaks. All of the stoners were on machine A, except for Arnold, and when the break schedule was handed down, he tried to negotiate with the warehouse manager that he was going to go on break with machine A because it was the only way he was going to get weed and have a joint on break. The boss was adamant. Arnold was just going to have to deal with the remainder of the shift without his weed, as it would take too much time to switch him with someone from machine A, and the breaks were about to start. So what does Arnold do? He just leaves when machine A goes for break, and machine B's production grinds to a screeching halt. The manager and the other department heads then spent the entire 15-minute break of machine A trying to get machine B running. But it was no use. They didn't have enough people after Arnold had just left like he did, so he was chewed out when he got back. Now to the story. One year I got a massive tax refund, because I had severely overestimated how much tax I would have to pay and had a portion of each paycheck deducted in advance. And as soon as the money was in my hands, I had a devilish idea. I went to Winston and asked if on the next break I could talk to him. When the break came, he and I went outside for a private chat. "Hey, you want to join our ranks? I've got a free sample on me," Winston asked. "No, I want to pull a little prank on Arnold," I replied. Winston, with a mean grin on his face, as he loves pranking people, and loves pranking Arnold particularly, said, "Oh, what did you have in mind?" "I want to buy 5 ounces of the best, top shelf, highest grade weed you can get your hands on. Like, go to your boss's boss, highest grade. Winston, now with a shocked look on his face. What? Dude, do you have any idea how much that's going to cost? Somewhere around 1,500, I said. About that, yeah. What are you going to do with it? Don't you worry about that. Just get it and bring everyone except Arnold to your car tomorrow night. I'll have the money for you then. The next night after we got off shift and all the stoners met up at Winston's car, Arnold was in the washroom having a post-shift joint, so he'll be missing this particular meeting. Thank you all for coming. Now I know that Arnold is related to one of you, and he mooches off of all of you. But I have a proposal. I then motioned to Winston to open his trunk, where he took out 5 big baggies, 1 ounce in each, of top-shelf weed. I motioned to the bags and said, "This is a present for each of you. I paid for this weed out of my pocket, and each of you is getting an ounce. You don't have to pay me back, and you don't have to share any of it with me. However, all you have to do to repay me is flaunt that you've got an ounce of the good stuff, and never give Arnold any of it, no matter how much he begs, moans, or complains. Guard your stash with your life, and make sure he doesn't get any of it. Give him the cheap stuff and go back to smoking that primo ganja." And yeah, I said ganja to emphasize my point. "You do that and the weed's on me. Also, don't tell Arnold where you got it from." Every stoner's eyes in that meeting, including Winston, who was getting an ounce of his own, lit up like Christmas had come early. They all eagerly agreed to the plan, grabbed their ounces and started rolling joints and packing bongs. Now these guys blew through their ounces in a week, and were smoking it like the feds were on their way. At the end of the week, the pot was all gone and Arnold was losing his mind. Once the last of it had gone up in smoke, I told Winston to tell Arnold where they got the pot from. Arnold then came into the break room during lunch that same day, and it was clear from looking at his face that he'd been crying his eyes out in the bathroom. He'd walked right up to me and said, "I just want you to know, I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care." He wouldn't stop saying "I don't care" over and over again, and he wouldn't stop all the way through lunch. When he'd finally finished, he stopped to take a breath, and I was able to speak for the first time. "But Arnold, if you honestly didn't care, you wouldn't have said anything. Go cry some more." And I left. But just as I walked past him, he sucker punches me in the back of the head, and in front of over 20 witnesses. I turned around, rubbing the back of my head, and just stared at him. He was immediately out the door, running to the warehouse manager, trying to feed him some story about how I'd tried to hurt him, and he just defended himself. The warehouse manager came into the break room and said to me, "We need to talk." "We don't need to talk privately, though," I said. "Everyone in here saw the whole thing." Everyone around me nodded their heads, and Arnold's fate was sealed. Arnold was moved to a different shift, and I wanted to press charges for assault. But my boss convinced me that it wouldn't be worth the hassle, and instead Arnold had to work on a shift where there were precisely 0 potheads, and if he didn't bring any weed with him, then it was tough. Honestly, I think that was probably the worst punishment he could get. So I work at a pizza shop, and I have been a closing manager for a while. My tasks are pretty simple when it's only me as manager closing. I clean the stretch table, clean the make line, clean the cut table, clean the front counter, and do the end of the day paperwork. When there's another manager there though, I'll just handle the stretch table and all the paperwork. Well, it was just me this night, as I had sent my closing driver home because he said he'd finished everything and had double-checked the dishes, empty sinks, empty cleaning buckets and trash, etc. I checked over everything as well and noticed some spot that he'd missed, so I went back over it and finished the job. But then I noticed that he hadn't done all the dishes like he'd said, and hadn't put things away either. And as I carried on looking, the list just kept getting bigger and bigger. Now at this point I was thinking to myself, I've got an hour left to do the end of day stuff. I'll do the best I can within the time left. So I did what I could, finished up all the paperwork and was able to get out of there by around 11:39 p.m. Yes, I could have done better, but I was ready to go home as it was almost midnight, and I still hadn't eaten anything all day. I went home and thought nothing more of it. Then the next day came, and I was working, doing my job like a good little boy. And after everything was said and done, the other manager told me to head to the office. The GM/DM had written me up. Now I saved this part for last because this'll be a good kick in the balls later for them. But about a week ago we had corporate come by and tell us that we were one of the highest ranked stores in the South, something like 3rd out of 601. The only thing we needed to work on was getting out of here on time, aka 20 minutes after we close. 20 minutes, with 2 people max. But I got a write-up for the store not being clean, so I played along and stayed there for as long as it took to get the store clean, and I'd stay there all night if I had to. I'll scrub every little nook and cranny, just so that they're happy. When I was in college, I worked at a gastropub as a server and bartender. After I had been there for a few months, we hired a new guy named Nathaniel, but everyone called him Nathan. My name is Joshua, and I've never gone by the name Josh, as that is my dad's name. And it's also just, I don't know, never suited me. I've always been pretty adamant about being called Joshua, ignoring teachers who shortened it, etc. I introduced myself to Nathan, who immediately said something like, "Nice to meet you, Josh." I politely told him that I preferred Joshua, using my go-to line. My dad is Josh, and my parents decided that Joshua was preferable to Bubba. I'm from the American South, where Bubba is a common nickname for any junior or male who has the same first name as his father, but it's also kind of a pejorative nickname used by people from other parts of the country for backward redneck southerners. The line usually gets a laugh, or at least a good-natured chuckle, and people don't seem to have a problem calling me Joshua from then on. Nathan, however, never once used my full name, and always called me Josh. I really liked the guy and enjoyed working with him, and we soon became pretty good friends, often hanging outside of work, etc. But his refusal to use my preferred name always kind of irked me. My very silly, very petty revenge was that I always called him Nate instead of Nathan. He looked at me oddly the first couple of times, but he never brought it up. I never once heard another person call him Nate, and frankly, Nathan suited him much better. However, one night, a few of us were closing the bar, and he, as usual, called me Josh, and one of the waitresses, bless her, corrected him. "He goes by Joshua. Nobody calls him Josh," she said. Nathan stopped wiping the bar, got a far-off look for a moment, then spun to look at me. "Is that why you call me Nate?" he asked. I just laughed. There was general banter for a few minutes about how everyone thought it was odd that I called him Nate, but nobody'd really thought about it. Nate laughed about it and then was like, "Screw it. Let's keep going with the wrong names." And so we did. He's the only person I know who calls me Josh, and as far as I know, nobody but me calls him Nate. What was once a bit of a nagging annoyance to me became a kind of bonding thing, having our own buddy names for each other. So my neighbour across the street is this militant retired cop, the poster boy of toxic masculinity. We call him Stone Cold, because he looks like Stone Cold Steve Austin. He's a real asshole, always yelling and cussing his dogs and his wife, etc. He normally sits in his garage at night, drinking until late. Alone mostly, but sometimes with his cop buddies, and keeps me up in the process. So I've moved my drumming practice to 8 AM with all my windows open, because that should be fun to listen to after a night of heavy drinking. Tonight he got into a huge fight, first with his daughter, who was a single mom still living with them, and then his wife. Apparently the daughter is pregnant again, and he thinks she's a slut because she got knocked up again by her scumbag boyfriend. The mom points out Stone Cold's hypocrisy by calling him a crooked cop. So I opened my window, not bothering to hide the fact that I was doing so, and watched the fight with my blinds open. I'm sure he saw me standing there with my bag of microwave popcorn, like I was live at the Jerry Springer show. He's just lucky I didn't record it and put it online. I will next time. So this was a few years ago when I was in high school and worked at a huge well-known clothing store. I was working the cash register, and it was company policy to check IDs when customers used credit cards and spent over $60. This is relevant for later. One day a woman came up to the register with this massive pile of clothes. No problem, of course, and I started to scan her stuff and make small talk. After scanning all of her clothes, her bill racked up to around $400. At that point I let her know the end sale price, and she handed over a credit card that clearly didn't have her name on it, as it was something like Michael. So I told her that she'd have to provide ID, as per the company policy. She became visibly agitated, and said that she didn't have an ID because the card was under her husband's name. "Oh, okay, I'm sorry, ma'am, but I cannot accept this form of purchase. Would you happen to have another one?" I said. She started to freak out and asked me if her husband could provide proof over the phone. I said no, and that's when she decided to go absolutely nuts, screaming at me and shoving the massive amount of clothes over the counter. Then she flipped me off and stormed out of the store. My co-workers all came over and asked if I was okay, to which I said yes, but that I needed to have someone jump onto the register for me. A few hours later, the lady came back with her husband, demanding all of the clothes that she had picked out earlier. But it was usual for us to just throw our go-backs into a basket nearby and put everything back at the end of the day. This is where my revenge comes in. See, when I jumped off of the register earlier that day, it wasn't to compose myself. It was so that I could put back all of the clothes she'd thrown over the counter at me. So when I knew she'd come back, they always do, she'd have to go look for it all over again. She was also having to stand in line for a really long time too, only for her then to greet me with a, "Where are my clothes at?" I went to pick up my husband since IDing is apparently so important here, whilst rolling her eyes. And I replied with the sweet words, "Oh, ma'am, unfortunately all of the clothes that you picked out have been put back onto the racks. You'll have to spend some time looking for them again." She looked at me like she wanted to strangle me, but she walked away because her husband piped up and said, "No problem, thank you." Poor guy was probably so embarrassed. Seeing that woman's face when I told her it had all been put back was euphoric to me, and seeing her take another 2 hours picking it all out again was even better. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed my video. And if you did, could you please give me virtual hugs by subscribing and clicking that notifications button. I also have a Patreon page and YouTube channel membership if you'd like to support me further. Thank you again for being here. Keep being creepy.